District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car right in your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. Here's where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so you can grab those and go out with your friends. Abercrombie's denim fits come in a range of washes. Build your looks around Abercrombie denim. Shop online or in-store.
Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Dear listeners, I'm not sure if you all are aware of a movement that is being done in the courts to sue oil and gas companies under the guise of them perpetuating and causing climate change. It also entails blaming them and holding them liable for other natural disasters too. And the perfect person to break this down is Thomas Catenacci from Washington Free Beacon. I work often with him for providing quotes, and he's always a wonderful guest, very well-versed on these issues. And he's done extensive reporting on this movement, has some hopefully positive developments on this. But Thomas, great to have you back on the show. I would love you to break this down as simply as possible for those of us who are not lawyers. Like, what the heck is going on? Why are oil and gas companies being sued by climate organizations, states attorneys generals? Why this movement?
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to be here and to be discussing this because, as you might know, these cases have extraordinary impact, but they're often not really picked up in the media because it very easily can kind of find yourself in the weeds. So the sort of top line issue here is states, on the face of it, states and jurisdictions, so cities, counties, say that they want to hold oil companies accountable for causing climate change. And so the way they do that is through something called public nuisance laws. And public nuisance laws basically govern, certain things that you can argue that the general public is harmed by. So, for example, if there's a local power plant that is leaking a very smelly gas, and it's hurting all the sort of neighboring houses and communities nearby, the local city can file a public nuisance claim against the operator of that plant to say you're causing a nuisance in this area. Now, as that example kind of shows, this is a very local sort of idea. But what these states and cities and counties and towns are doing with climate litigation against oil companies is they're taking that and they're applying it to global warming. And so that's sort of the general, very simple framework of what we're looking at with these lawsuits. But really, the even higher top line view here is they want to put oil companies out of business. And they've just found that this is the avenue to do it because it allows them to ask courts to force oil companies to pay damages if those oil companies are found to have, quote unquote, caused climate change. And you can imagine those are that's huge sums of money to the point where even though this is not really being covered too much by the media, it's existential for the oil industry and existential really for any consumer that is concerned about, paying affordable energy prices, whether that's at the pump or natural gas to power their home. So that's, again, the top line. Now we can get into sort of the background. I'll send it back to you, but I'm happy to talk about where this idea originated from, because again, it is very novel. It's never been done before. It's, just within the last decade have we seen these things come up. So I would love to talk about some of the influence there and then get into what we're seeing today on these cases.
Yeah, talk about why this is a relatively new type of lawsuit or tactic that they're doing. Why is that the case? Yeah.
So it stems back to around 2016, 2017. I did a bunch of reporting on this, but there were these, conferences, very shadowy conferences and meetings happening largely in California, but you also saw some of this in Hawaii too, actually. And it involved a few characters, one of whom is a woman named Ann Carlson. She was a law professor at UCLA. And then a bunch of other characters were people at large left-wing nonprofits. And they all kind of got together and they said, we can approach this through a different way. Everything we're trying to do to, stop climate change and fight oil companies is not working. So we have to figure out a different way. And with the plan that they devised was they were going to really funnel all of their energy into this tactic. And so around the same time, a law firm was founded in California called Scher Edling. And Scher Edling is really the brains behind the organization. Your listeners may see headlines such as Minnesota sues oil companies or California AG sues oil companies. There's countless cases of these. This is something that's become so common recently. Left-wing AGs, basically every left-wing AG has filed some sort of litigation in this respect. And so they are kind of the face of it, but in every single case, this law firm that was founded in 2017 or late 2016 is actually doing the litigating. And so what does that mean? That means that they are taking on very, very expensive cases. So again, going back to those kind of meetings and the plan that was devised just less than a decade ago, they figured, well, we can fund this law firm and this litigation through nonprofits and through activists who have a lot of money. And that's exactly what they did. They created a fund called the Collective Action Fund. And at the time, it was managed by a left-wing environmental nonprofit. Since it's moved over to the Arabella Network at the New Venture Fund. I'm kind of rambling here again, but the point is they created a pass-through. Mm-hmm. And so it allowed for billionaires who were really invested in this again to give to one group, which would then funnel the money to Scher Edling. And over the course of the past around 7 or 8 years, $14 million has been funneled through this sort of pass-through entity into Scher Edling, including from Leonardo DiCaprio, which is, I've done a bunch of reporting on how we kind of track that. So I would redirect your viewers there because it's very interesting how DiCaprio got involved in this. But it's an example of a very wealthy climate activist who we were able to track his money. We haven't been able to track all of the money that's gone to Scher Edling, but he's one example. So you can imagine there are a lot of similarly situated, wealthy individuals invested in fighting climate change who are involved here. So that's a little bit of the background. And so since they first filed their initial cases in around 2017, Scher Edling represents lawsuits from jurisdictions that are home to more than 25% of the American population. So that's a quarter of the country is involved in, suing oil companies for quote unquote public nuisance or causing climate change.
Interesting. And where are these cases being tried? So you've covered a couple blue states. Explain what some of the recent rulings and attempts have been there.
Yes. So they're all being litigated in state courts. Oil companies had originally tried to get them to be litigated in federal courts, but they failed to do that, and they were sent back to state courts. But what we've seen recently is in a number of these cases, even left-wing judges are just saying, like, we can't, this is not the proper avenue for this sort of thing. So, for example, New York City, Delaware State Court, most recently New Jersey State Court, and then a number of jurisdictions in Maryland, including Baltimore, Anne Arundel, and Annapolis. And so judges in all these cases have, even if they're left wing and might, believe in fighting climate change or global warming or whatever you want to call it, they have ruled that these state courts are not the proper avenue for regulating nationwide or even global emissions, which is a key point because, Sherrod Edling and these state attorneys general, they are kind of trying to pull kind of a sneaky maneuver by saying this is a public nuisance for the local area, when in reality, what they're really fighting for is to shut down the oil industry to fight global emissions. And so what I think you're seeing a lot recently is local judges, despite maybe whatever their own bias is, saying this just can't stand in this avenue.
And what states? You've covered Maryland, recently New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So New York City, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, those are the ones that have been ruled on recently. There's a number that we expect rulings in the coming weeks, months, including Minnesota. And then just some of the other states that are involved in their own litigation too. Besides those ones, Massachusetts, Maine was the most recent one to file. California filed one, and then a number of cities too. Chicago. I have the list in front of me here. Oakland, Honolulu, San Mateo County, California, Charleston, Richmond. The list goes on and on. It's all on Sherrod Edling's website and public filings. They're very proud of the fact that they're kind of, again, like I said, the brains behind the organization, because they really, really believe that at the end of the day, it's not going to be Congress or state legislatures that are going to, stick it to oil companies. They believe they're the ones that are going to do it, and they're going to do it through courts by forcing oil companies to pay billions and billions of dollars in alleged, climate damages. And so their tactic here is truly, let's kind of scattershot. Let's go through as many jurisdictions and states as we possibly can. And if a few of them are successful and oil companies have to pay all of these damages to us and to the state, and it potentially forces those companies to shut down or scale back their operations, they see that as a win for fighting climate change in a way that's a lot more tangible than if, the government were to pass a law saying something about regulating emissions from tailpipes or power plants, whatever. So they really see this as the main fight.
And has the Supreme Court indicated any interest? Because there was a headline, I believe, earlier in January that said that a challenge by oil and gas companies was not heard. So do you think they'll have an appetite to correct kind of this back and forth, or have an interest? Because a lot of people have said that the Justice Roberts Court could be open to kind of peeling back or depoliticizing climate issues. At the courts, they don't seem to be a fan of it, but they have lately had a mixed record. But what's happening at the Supreme Court from what you can tell?
Right. So the Supreme Court has not truly weighed in on the case. And, we talked a lot about, or maybe I should say I rambled about the public nuisance law and kind of what is being argued here by plaintiffs. They haven't weighed in on that issue. What they've mainly weighed in on is whether these cases belong, I think I mentioned this before, but in state court where they're currently being litigated or in federal court. And all the Supreme Court has said is that they can remain in state courts. And that was a major victory for all the Democratic AGs and state attorneys that had filed these cases. But what the most recent headline that you're referring to was just the fact that the Supreme Court said that they weren't going to take up the issue, that they weren't going to, consider it. And so that's another win for the jurisdiction suing. But I will note that that was in large part influenced by a Solicitor General decision or memorandum to the Supreme Court, basically siding with the plaintiffs and against oil companies, saying that the Supreme Court shouldn't take it up. And of course, the Solicitor General at the time, she was appointed by Joe Biden under the Biden administration. So it was, you can kind of interpret it as a parting blow that the Biden administration gave to oil companies, was telling the Supreme Court through an official memorandum in this case to leave it to state courts and to not take up the case.
Fascinating. Is there anything about these court cases or just the tactics by climate activists, environmental groups? Because now they're going on defense, responding to the Trump administration. Are we going to see more in your sense, like a broad scope, more lawsuits? It seems like they're already like upping the ante with lawsuits against Trump's directives, kind of the course correction he's doing to move away from net zero posturing to more pro-energy development, kind of back to a conservation stewardship interpretation of lands and waters issues. So do you think they're going to be using the courts to perhaps derail Trump's efforts?
100%. I think that these sort of issues, especially climate litigation, this is the area to watch. And I know that your listeners are very interested in this space. So I would just, encourage them to watch that, type of litigation, climate nuisance, and then anything else related to environmental challenges of federal rules. And the reason why I say that is they are, climate activists and climate groups, no matter how much money they have, they are right now in a place of being very weakened. They had a seat at the table during the Biden administration. Right now they don't. And so they're going to continue to look, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of these cases being filed by states that haven't gotten in on the fun. For example, Michigan, I think and Wisconsin, I think those two are kind of ripe for being one of the, 2 or 3 next states to file climate nuisance litigation. But yes, we're going to see at the state level more climate rules, more crackdowns on fossil fuels, because again, at the federal level, they just don't have the power that they did a month ago and for the past 4 years. So it's a major issue for them as they kind of try to figure out how to fight climate change. Great question.
And anything else you're looking into, reporting on, focusing on that my listeners should be aware of? Because you do great, excellent original reporting. I bet you're going to have a lot of content to sift through, but maybe more positive developments compared to a lot of what you had previously covered. But it seems like there's a lot of executive actions, perhaps some stuff that might be codified by Congress. What type of reporting recently would you like my listeners to be attuned to? What have you covered? What stories should deserve more attention?
Well, I would direct your listeners into some of our reporting on the big spending programs that were rushed out of the door, and the grants and rebates and loans that were all rushed out of the door in the final 6 or so months of the Biden administration. We're going to be doing a lot of work looking into those, looking into all of that money that went out the door and how it went out the door, because I think there are a lot of issues with cutting corners, rushing money again, maybe before it should have been spent. And so even as we were speaking, a story of mine was published about an electric bus company that received $160 million from the Biden administration's EPA. That company is now very close to bankruptcy. It's lost something like $300 million. Like it hasn't made a profit since it went public in 2020. And so there's a lot of issues similar to that that we're going to continue to dig in on. And it certainly is a little bit a lot different than working with the Biden administration, because the Trump administration came in and they very much have a posture of let's look at every dollar and penny that went out the door, which is music to someone like my ears, because I was doing a lot of reporting on why are we giving billions of dollars to these companies, like Rivian or Q-Cells, so many companies with kind of sketchy finances or even sketchy like Chinese ties, and a lot of ethical concerns with who was at EPA and DOE giving these monies out. And so it's music to my ears to hear the Trump administration come in. I've worked with some of them so far in the first few weeks here who say, we're going to pause things. And first, what we're going to do is look at the funding, look at the grants, and make sure it was tidy and well vetted before even thinking about moving forward.
I believe a lot of the listeners, and personally speaking, it'd be nice to uncover where all those loans in the last days of the waning days of the Biden administration went to. Why were they artificially propping up companies that were not profitable without government subsidies? Very hard to keep these companies afloat. So we're going to see a lot of that expose, I think, through your reporting and similar reporting from others that we travel alongside with. So it'll be interesting to see how much money was wasted as expected. And then perhaps some reforms that are going to be coming from these newly managed agencies. I'm pretty excited about some of the developments, the promises of nuclear being unleashed more fully, and some other technologies that are more reliable and perhaps not to the detriment of the taxpayer. So that's going to be something I think a lot of us are looking forward to. Thomas, where would you like people to follow your reporting work? Send all the links as usual whenever you come on the show. You're very good at disseminating the appropriate links, but where can people follow your writings and connect with you if they have a story idea?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking. Everything is on WashingtonFreeBeacon.com. So I would just direct your listeners back over to the Free Beacon's website where all my work is published. And you can also follow me on Twitter or X. I usually will not only post my stories there, but also give some more kind of background on the stories too. And I can be reached through X. My DMs are always open for people with a story idea.
Perfect. Really appreciate you coming on and breaking down this topic for us, Thomas, and hopefully we can revisit again with any other great reporting that you have. Really appreciate the time, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Gabby.
If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.